Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. We are diving into something I think is pretty fascinating today. Have you heard of shadow work?
Oh, absolutely. Shadow work is becoming quite popular, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a lot different than what we usually think of with journaling.
Yeah.
Usually it's all about gratitude and good vibes,
Right. Focusing on the positive.
but shadow work is kind of the opposite. It's
Yeah.
about looking at those, parts of ourselves that we tend to hide. Maybe those insecurities or fears or even just like behaviors that we don't love.
It's really about acknowledging the full spectrum of who we are, the light and the shadow.
Exactly. And today, we're using an awesome resource to guide us. It's Clara Penrose's 50 Shadow Journal Prompts from her blog, LeStallion.
Oh, I've heard good things about her blog. I'm excited to dive into these
Me
prompts.
too.
Yeah.
And what's so cool is how she's categorized them. It's not just a random list of fears or anything. She dives into how those past wounds impact us and how we react when things get tough, and even prompts about embracing our so-called negative qualities.
It's like a roadmap for self-discovery, guiding us through different layers of our inner world.
Totally. Like I was just glancing through, and some of these really jumped out at me, like uh, a fear that holds you back in life, and a painful memory from your past that you haven't fully processed. Whoa.
Those are powerful. And then there are ones that are more about taking action, like a time when you acted out of anger. What triggered you, and how could you respond differently next time?
Oof, yeah, that one hits home.
Right. It's about becoming more aware of those patterns and making conscious choices. And this all ties back to Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self.
Fill me in, remind me.
So Jung believed that everyone has this shadow side. It's like a hidden part of our personality where we store all those thoughts, emotions, and impulses that we deem unacceptable or negative. And his idea was that by bringing these aspects into our conscious awareness, we can actually integrate them into a more whole and authentic self.
Okay, so it's not about getting rid of those parts of ourselves, but more about understanding them.
Exactly. It's about befriending your shadow, not battling it.
I like that. So let's jump into those prompts, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay, so Claire's first category is all about exploring inner fears and insecurities. And one prompt that I thought was really interesting was think about a situation where you felt intense insecurity. What triggered those feelings and how do they still impact you?
That's a great starting point because it invites us to really examine those moments when we feel most vulnerable.
Right. It's like we all have those moments. It's like when you walk into a room and suddenly you feel like everyone's judging you. Even if you know logically, there's no reason for them to be.
Absolutely. That fear of judgment is a common thread that runs through many of our insecurities.
It makes me wonder, is that just part of being human? Like, is that fear of judgment just kind of hardwired into us?
It definitely seems to be a universal experience. It goes back to our deep-seated need for belonging and connection. When we perceive any threat to that, our insecurities tend to flare up.
That makes sense. So this prompt is about tracing those insecurities back to their source.
Exactly. It's about understanding the roots of those feelings so that we can start to work with them constructively.
Okay, so instead of just feeling insecure, we're encouraged to investigate why we feel that way. It's like detective work for our emotions.
I like that analogy.
There's another prompt in this section that stood out to me. Describe a way you might be holding yourself back from happiness. What fears or insecurities keep you from moving forward?
Whoa. Ooh, that's a powerful one. It goes right to the heart of self-sabotage, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we all do it in different ways, right? We stay in jobs that make us miserable, or we avoid going after our dreams, or maybe we push away people who care about us.
It's like we have this internal brake system that kicks in whenever we get too close to what we truly desire.
It's like those times when a great opportunity comes along. And instead of being excited, you feel this wave of fear or doubt and you freeze up. I've been there. Do you think exploring this prompt can actually help us break free from those patterns?
I think it's a crucial step. By bringing those fears and insecurities into our conscious awareness, we can start to challenge their validity. We can ask ourselves, are these fears based on real evidence, or are they echoes of past experiences that no longer hold true?
Right. So it's about gaining that awareness so we can make different choices.
Exactly. The more we understand those patterns, the more empowered we become to choose differently.
This is already making me think about all those what-if scenarios that I let hold me back sometimes. Maybe facing those fears head on is the key to actually moving forward.
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Okay, now Clara's next category is uncovering past wounds and memories. And I would say this one feels a bit heavier, but I get the sense that it's just as important.
It is. It's about acknowledging how our past experiences, particularly those that were painful or traumatic, can shape our perceptions and behaviors in the present.
Right. Like we can't just pretend that those experiences didn't happen.
Exactly. And one prompt that really resonated with me in this section was, write about a time when you felt betrayed by someone you trusted. How did it impact your view of relationships?
Oof. That's a tough one, but it's so relatable. I mean, I think we've all experienced betrayal in some form or another,
It's a universal experience, unfortunately.
and those wounds can run so deep. It can make you question everything and everyone, especially your ability to trust. So I wonder, can journaling about those experiences actually help heal those wounds?
I believe it can be a powerful step in the healing process. When we avoid those painful memories, they often linger in our subconscious, influencing our thoughts and actions without us even realizing it.
It's like they're festering under the surface.
Exactly. But by writing about them in a safe and controlled environment, we can start to process those emotions and begin to make sense of what happened.
So it's like bringing those buried emotions to the surface where we can finally deal with them.
That's a great way to put it.
There's another prompt here that I think ties into that. Think of a relationship that ended in a way that left you feeling unresolved. How does this unfinished chapter affect you?
Hmm. That speaks to the power of closure, doesn't it? Or rather, the lack thereof.
Right. It's like when a relationship ends abruptly or without a sense of resolution, it can leave you feeling kind of stuck.
It's like a song that ends on a dissonant chord.
Yeah. You keep replaying those scenarios in your head, wondering what might have been or what you could have done differently.
Yeah, we might even carry that unfinished business with us into new relationships without realizing it.
Like, without even realizing it, we might be seeking closure in all the wrong places.
Precisely. This prompt invites us to examine how those unresolved endings might still be influencing our present relationships. Are we guarding ourselves against potential hurt because of past pain? Are we unconsciously seeking something that we didn't get in the past?
Wow. Okay, this is already getting pretty deep. It's making me realize how interconnected our past and present really are.
That's the power of shadow work. It helps us connect the dots, understand our patterns, and ultimately create a more conscious and fulfilling life.
I'm already feeling those dots connecting.
Ready to explore some more of these prompts?
Oh, absolutely. These first two categories have already given me so much to think about.
Okay, so moving on. Let's dive into a category that I think has some really practical tools for navigating everyday life. It's recognizing triggers and reactions.
Ooh, this sounds interesting.
Yeah, and there's a prompt here by Clara that I find super insightful. It is, describe a situation where you reacted strongly to something. What was the trigger, and why do you think it affected you so deeply?
Oh yeah, that one's good. It's for those times when you completely overreact to something small, and then later you're like, why did I do that?
Exactly. We all have these triggers, specific words, actions, or even just situations that can evoke this huge emotional response. And often these triggers are linked to past experiences or, maybe unresolved stuff that we haven't fully dealt with.
Right. Right. It's like a hidden landmine. You think you're doing okay, and then boom, something sets you off and you just explode. But what if we could, I don't know, identify those landmines? Maybe then we could avoid them.
I think that's the whole point. By becoming aware of our triggers, we can start to understand the real reasons behind our reactions. We can start to see the difference between what's actually happening in the present moment and what's being dredged up from the past.
So it's about creating that space between the trigger and the reaction.
Yeah.
Right? So we can choose how we respond instead of just reacting automatically.
Exactly. Instead of just reacting, we can pause. We can observe what's happening. Then we decide how we want to respond.
Okay, so how do we do that? Where do we even begin?
Well, one way is to start paying attention to those moments when you feel that surge of emotion. Ask yourself, what just happened? What thoughts or feelings are coming up for me right now?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's another prompt in this section that I think really dives into this whole trigger-reaction dynamic. It's, describe an aspect of your personality that comes out during conflict. How do you feel about this side of yourself?
Ooh, yeah, this is a good one.
It makes me think about how we all have different, I don't know, versions of ourselves that come out in different situations.
Like different masks we wear.
Totally.
Well,
For instance, I'm usually pretty easygoing, but when conflict arises, oh man, I can get super assertive, almost argumentative, and it's not always my best look.
this prompt challenges us to acknowledge those, maybe less than ideal sides of ourselves that show up when we're under stress.
Like those shadow sides.
Right. But it's not about judging them, it's about understanding them. Like what needs or fears are driving those reactions.
Hmm. This makes me realize that conflict can actually be a powerful mirror. It shows us parts of ourselves that we might otherwise keep hidden, even from ourselves.
That's a great point. And once we've acknowledged those sides of ourselves, we can actually start to work with them in a more constructive way. Maybe we can find healthier ways to express our needs or to deal with anger. Or maybe we discover that some of those qualities, when channeled in the right way, can actually be strengths.
Oh, that's interesting. So, like, my assertiveness in conflict, while not always pretty, can also be a way of setting boundaries and standing up for myself.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Okay, this is blowing my mind a little bit. So now we get to Claire's next category, embracing the shadow self. And this feels like a total shift in perspective.
It is. This is where we move from just acknowledging our shadow to actually embracing it. It's about realizing that all parts of ourselves, even the ones we judge as negative or bad, have a role to play in our wholeness.
I love that. We're so conditioned to strive for perfection, to eliminate our flaws. But what if those so-called flaws are actually part of what makes us, well, us?
And, one prompt that really challenges that whole perfection idea is reflect on a quality in yourself that you consider negative.
Yeah.
Why do you label it this way, and how could you view it differently?
That's a good one. I've always struggled with being self-critical, and I've always seen that as like a bad thing. But maybe it's also what motivates me to, I don't know, to improve and grow.
Exactly. It's about reframing those so-called negative qualities and seeing their potential value. Your self-criticism, when channeled constructively, can help you refine your skills and push yourself to be your best.
It's like finding the gold in the darkness.
I love that. And there's another prompt that speaks to this idea of transformation. It says, write about a part of your personality that you often avoid or suppress. What are you afraid would happen if you embraced it?
Whoa. Okay, this one is deep. What are we hiding, not just from the world, but maybe even from ourselves?
It's about those parts of ourselves that we've deemed unacceptable or maybe even dangerous, like the things we're afraid to let out.
I think for a lot of people, it's anger or sadness. We're told to, like, be positive and put on a happy face.
Mm.
But what if suppressing those emotions actually makes them stronger?
It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can only hold it down for so long before it pops back up with even more force.
So by acknowledging those emotions, we can actually start to release their hold on us.
Exactly. It's about giving ourselves permission to feel the full range of our emotions.
This reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about Jung's concept of the shadow self. If we're always trying to suppress those shadow aspects, are we actually preventing ourselves from becoming whole?
That's such a good point. Jung believed that by integrating our shadow, we actually move closer to wholeness. We stop projecting those unwanted parts onto other people and start to accept ourselves more fully.
It's like instead of running from those parts of ourselves, we're finally turning around and facing them.
Exactly. And that integration can be a lifelong journey.
A journey of self-discovery.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay. This deep dive is getting pretty intense, but in a good way.
Right. It's definitely making us think.
Okay, so Claire's final category is cultivating self-compassion and acceptance. And I have a feeling this is the key to making this whole shadow work thing sustainable.
It is. Shadow work can be challenging. It can even be uncomfortable at times. So approaching it with self-compassion is essential.
This last category, cultivating self-compassion and acceptance, feels like the perfect way to wrap up this whole shadow work deep dive.
It does, doesn't it?
Like we spent all this time exploring these, darker parts of ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and now we need to come back up for air with like a sense of kindness and understanding for ourselves.
Exactly. Shadow work can bring up a lot of heavy stuff, challenging emotions and memories and all that. So
Yeah.
it's super important to approach this whole process with a gentle heart.
Absolutely. Oh, there's a prompt here from Clara that really gets that. Reflect on a way you can be kinder to yourself in moments of doubt. How could this shift your relationship with yourself?
Oh, that's a good one.
It's like that inner critic we all have.
Ugh. Tell me about it.
That voice that can be so mean, especially when you're already feeling down.
It's like it kicks you when you're already down, doesn't it?
Totally. It makes me think, like, what if we treated ourselves with the same kindness that we would offer a friend?
That's such a good point. We're often so much harder on ourselves than we would ever be on anyone else.
So true. What if we replaced that inner critic with, like, an inner cheerleader?
Yes, someone who believes in you and reminds you of all the amazing things you're capable of.
I love that. And there's another prompt that I think fits in perfectly here. It's Write about a goal you achieved that once felt impossible. How does acknowledging your success build self-confidence?
Oh, celebrating our wins is so important.
It is.
It's like giving ourselves permission to feel proud, recognizing how far we've come and all the challenges we've overcome.
Instead of just focusing on, like, what we still haven't done.
Right. It's so easy to get caught up in that, like, what's next mentality and forget to appreciate how far we've already come.
This whole conversation about shadow work and self-compassion has been so eye-opening for me.
Me too. It's really made me think.
It feels like we've gone on this journey together, exploring those darker parts of ourselves and coming out the other side with a better understanding of, like, what it means to be human.
That's a great way to put it.
So we've only scratched the surface of Clara's 50 prompts,
Right?
but I think we've uncovered some really valuable insights about this whole idea of shadow work and self-compassion.
It's all about accepting ourselves fully, shadows and all.
I love that. So for our listeners, we'll leave you with one final prompt from Clara. It says, write about a way you can celebrate who you are today, flaws and all. What small rituals or practices can you create to honor your journey?
And until next time, happy shadow journaling, everyone.